Nearly ready. Welcome back. Hope you had some. No, I didn't. I thought you were doing something.
Then okay.
I hope you had some good refreshment and we're ready for the second part of the workshop.
Yes. Now.
So yeah, there we are. So I think it's it's my pleasure to introduce Harald Binder from the University of Freiburg. And he is director of the Institute of Medical Biometry and Statistics and speaker of the Collaborative Research Center on Small Data, which is what we're going to hear about. And he holds a PhD in statistics from LMU Munich. I'm looking forward to the talk.
Great. Thanks for the kind introduction. Thanks for the possibility for speaking here. I liked that, like when in the first presentation, when we had the LLMs, it was like you use a cool LLM to generate your code, but then you use it to generate code for a Cox model or something, like combination of very modern and rather traditional. So I like Cox models, so no doubt about that. But the question is like, can you also do a little bit more in terms on the modeling side? And you might say, I mean, we also had this, with image data, when you have 10,000 images, yes, you're going for guns with convolutional neural networks or something. But the question is, does this also apply for when you have clinical data sets and when you have, in particular, small clinical data sets? And as already mentioned, we have our Collaborative Research Center, Small Data, where we are thinking about this, how can AI be made feasible also with smaller data sets? And I'm going to show you just a few examples of that. But before, I'd like to briefly make a recap what we mean with generative AI. So when I try to sell you to use generative AI, not instead of the Cox model, but maybe to complement the Cox model, what does it mean? Basically, it means something with artificial neural networks. And generative means there has to be a distribution in it. And this is not a very precise definition, but maybe there is actually no really precise definition, because like how this term has been used over time has changed a little bit. So if you're going back like 5 years or something, you would say, neural network architecture with some distribution. You're, for example, thinking about variational autoencoders. This is an architecture that explicitly has parameters of a distribution in it. And the big competitor at the time, these were generative adversarial networks, which we just saw, where you kind of implicitly learn some distribution. You don't have the parameters in it, but in the end, you can sample from a distribution. And now the new kid on the block are transformer architectures, and in particular, if you use generative transformer architectures, they have become very popular under the label of generative pre-trained transformers. This is what gave GPT its name, so it's very prominent now in large language models. So I'm not going to cover GANs, so like I'm going to give you examples too with variation autoencoders, and I couldn't resist also to show a little bit about transformers and a little bit about LLMs. So, and I promise, so it's clinical data, it's small clinical data, so we're going very small, we're going towards a rare disease, and in particular, we in our methods research, we like to look at longitudinal data, and this is data from a registry from children with spinal muscular atrophy, where you look in the context of a gene defect, you look at development of motor performance in the course of the time. That means at different time points, you have some instruments for assessing the motor performance. So like you ask questions or you get questions asked like, can the patient stand? Can the patient grab a ball or something? And what you can do now, these are items with different values. And now now you can take an artificial neural network, just a brief recap. So this is like a multi-layer transformation where we're doing a linear combination of the input with some non-linear transformation on top, and you do this several times. And now what you can do, you can use this four-dimension reduction, for example, here going down to 4 dimensions in that case, and I'm actually not going down to 4 dimensions, but even like to 2 dimensions, because I say I don't want to just dimension reduction, I want to have a distribution, and so these 4 circles stand for the parameters for distribution, so 2 for the expected values and 2 for the variance. And so when I've done this dimension reduction, I can do some sampling in this latent space. So there's a neural network and I have a distribution. And the question is now, what can this be useful for? So far, you could say it's just an exercise. We made that work even with a rather small number of observations. And I mean, what you can do is you can treat this not like LLM, you ask like a large language model some questions, but you can say what this low-dimensional representation, where you have distributions, what this should be looking like. You can impose some structure on it. And one way for imposing structure is when you're moving along the course of time with the children grow up, you need different measurement instruments for motor performance. This means you have different measurement instruments, and you don't have all measurement instruments at all times. So in this artificial example, we are lucky at the first time point, we have 3 measurement instruments, and we can say, dear neural network architecture, please use your dimension reduction, your nonlinear transformation in such a manner that these all jointly map on a joint representation. So there should be some essence to all these measurement instruments, some information about the patient, because it's in the end, it's about the motor performance of the patient that should be in all measurement instruments. And we say this representation that we learn should somehow reflect this, like abstract away from the peculiarities of the measurement instruments and say, yes, what we have there now is in essence, the motor performance of the patient. And then this also works when we only, for example, have 2 of these measurement instruments. And you see, as we're going a long time in this artificial example, but it also works for real data. And this means suddenly we no longer care about precisely what measurement instrument we have at what times, because we got this joint representation. And you see, I made it such that there's a nice curve to be modeled in that latent representation. So you say, this is where you can now do your statistical modeling. Or you can say you're doing a generative thing, because these variation autoencoders I've been showing, these are not just about doing dimension reduction, but there's also a decoder component to it where you say, hey, I sample from its distribution, I generate new data. And now you can do something, you say, I've done some modeling in this latent representation where I'm mapping all measurement instruments. For example, let's assume you did a model where you are modeling the effects of treatment switch. So let's assume you have taken care of causality and observational data and all these issues, and now you have your model. And you can say, what happens if we have a treatment switch versus not having a treatment switch? And what you can then do, you say, yeah, cool model, but unfortunately, it's in this latent representation that I cannot really understand. Then you can simply say, yeah, we are going to map back to the real observation space, to our items, and we can basically describe what we would assume what the measurements for these patients would look like at all these measurement instruments, even if we don't have all measurement instruments at each single time point. And you could even say, yeah, you're going to use this for imputation or something, and then you're going to use more traditional statistical techniques. You see, this is kind of a playground that can stimulate your creativity by being willing to say, okay, I'm going to combine neural networks with generative capabilities and some statistical modeling. And it's not only possible in this configuration with the variation autoencoders. You can, for example, say, I have another example, where we are looking at another rare disease, epidermolysis bullosa, where obviously all the patients that we have in the registry are treated. But we say, hey, we actually would be really grateful, or our clinical collaboration partners tell us this, we would be really grateful if we had a control arm. Obviously, we don't have one. And so we could think about, okay, how could we build a synthetic control arm? And they have lots of knowledge in the literature, what the dynamics, in particular of the inflammation actually looks like. So we sat together and could, this is just a rough first draft, and turned this knowledge into a differential equation system. But then obviously we don't know all parameters of this because the literature isn't as nice to us to specify us all parameters for our differential equation system, but we have some real data. And now we can calibrate our differential equation system with the real data. Unfortunately, the real data doesn't have all the variables in, it doesn't have it at all the times, but we can say we take our synthetic data, we put it in this variation autoencoder, we put the real data also into this variation autoencoder, we take some precautions for making sure that these can roughly match into a joint representation, and then we can look at both and try to adjust our simulated data, so the parameters of the differential equation system, such that you get a decent fit or decent match between the synthetic data and the real data. This means we use this for calibrating, and once we have this calibrated system, then we can say, okay, this is now the calibrated system for the treatment, and now let's think about how we change this for doing the synthetic control arm. So these were two examples how variational autoencoders can be used when you say, okay, let's just use these new tools. The generation part in the first example was like in the middle of the autoencoder. There it was outside. We only used this for calibration. I also promised you to talk a little bit about LLMs and transformers. And there the challenge is that the transformers architectures that are behind LLMs have become very prominent for big data sets, like trained on all the text from the internet. But the question is, how can you use this in your clinical data set? And I have one quick example that is like from a study on psychological resilience, where daily hazards, life events, and mental health were measured in the course of time. And you have to think about, okay, I want to use these transformers. These have been developed mostly for text data. So how do I turn my data into something that is used for transformers? And then you think about, hey, you take your data and you turn it into sequences. These are just hypothetical individuals, but you see like what these individuals reported in terms, this one here in terms of noise that may cause nightmares and the lack of sleeping problems, and then a more severe disturbance. Then you see another individual that maybe doesn't sleep well, but not because of the noise, but maybe more because of conflict, close person and the job loss. So but then I've been telling you kind of like the stories of these individuals, and you get the feeling you are already closer to language. So what transformers have been very useful for. And the nice thing is, if you are willing to do with let's say a little bit of simplified versions of transformers, then you can train transformers once you've turned your clinical data into such sequences. And I only have a little bit of notation just to make one term. Let's, the first thing from these sequence elements, which are typically called tokens, these have to mapped into a vector space, that is the embedding vectors. And what you simply do is you do some transformations on these. There are key tokens, so-called value tokens and query tokens, and then you multiply all this together. And it isn't actually, in essence, not very complicated. As you go along the sequence and you have one observation, you say, hey, this one observation at this position is going to be a weighted combination of the others, and not just of the others nearby, but of all the elements. So you can, for example, say, hey, I'm seeing a sleep disturbance, and I'm seeing a sleep disturbance, and then in the beginning, I saw job loss. This is actually a job loss sleep disturbance. Or you can say, this is a noise sleep disturbance. And it's so like the math behind this is actually pretty simple, but it sometimes gets buried in the complex architecture and so on. But this is actually very close to statistical models that we are used to using. So I think it's really worth considerations. And if you do this, you can do different things with it. So, for example, this is hypothetical data that you could get with, and you can see, yeah, now let's use this as a generative model. So we say, okay, this is an individual that had problems with the job loss, and maybe then also some conflicts. Looks rather plausible, and then we can say, once we've trained our model, we can now continue the sequence. And like our fit model actually does do a decent job. So like it could learn that, yeah, job loss probably means that you have trouble with looking for a new job. You probably run into financial problems. Yeah, and also the conflicts with a close person maybe continue. I mean, this is not a like objective performance evaluation. We also did this. This was just a toy example of showing you what you can get if you're willing to say, hey, I'm also using transformer architectures with clinical data. This is just like last example that I can maybe skip or mentioned in the last 30 seconds or something, because I didn't tell you how you get these embeddings for your sequence elements actually. And one is you learn this from the data, and the other is you say these large language model, or also more classically like BERT, these already had to learn these embeddings, so you can just steal these embeddings from them. So we did this, we did a dimensional reduction of that. We saw, hey, we got a plausible arrangement where something like nightmares and lack of sleep are closer together as noise. And the nice thing is you get this context effect, what is nowadays called in context learning. When you say, I'm putting in some nightmares and lack of sleep as a context for the noise, I get a different position in the space, a different representation. It's just plain putting the noise in. So you can really exploit the knowledge that is embodied in this model. And with this, I'm already ending. I'm thanking the people who really did the work and also our funders for making our small data research possible.
Thank you so much. Very nice overview. And I think we have time for questions. Are there any questions in the room? Yes.
So just a quick question. How much small is small? So how much data do you really need to train these algorithms, these tools, especially because you're in the context of rare diseases and it can sometimes get very tricky?
We even did a paper where we asked like how small can it get? So like the paper title is, can it be trained with just 2 time points? And if the answer was yes, so like the real answer is it depends. But like if you are carefully tailoring the architecture, you can go to down to something like a few hundred individuals with a rather small number of time points. So we went to extremes like something like 200 patients, 5 time points. But then you really have to be very careful. So it's better when you have more, but you can really get it to work also in settings like with the rare disease registries.
Any other questions? Yes, here, one.
Thank you very much. Very interesting talk. Just curious, you seem to be using variational autoencoders quite a lot in different of these setups. Did you try different fitting approaches like contrastive learning or methods that have been developing more recently that maybe also very well fit for the task that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't get too attached to variational autoencoders. The thing also why we have been choosing them also historically in contrast, for example, to generative adversarial networks is that we can more easily embed statistical models there. For example, I teased you a little bit with this model for the treatment switch effect. This is actually, for example, a mixed effects model. And like what we can do by using a variational autoencoder, we are getting a gradient flowing through the full model. And we can basically say, please find us a latent representation where we can optimally fit a linear mixed effects model. And this is a specific property that we get from the variational autoencoders. You can get something naturally also from other approaches, but like with the variational autoencoders, it's particularly simple, but also I admit, shouldn't be too attached to the variational autoencoders. There are many other cool approaches out there.
Thank you. Maybe we have some questions online.
There's one question online, and this is about comparison with other multidimensional reduction techniques. And here in these questions, TSNE and factorial component analysis are specifically mentioned.
Yeah. So, or you could think, okay, why? I mean, we have been doing dimension reduction from with questionnaire data, not only for decades, but maybe nearly for a century or something like that. You could use PCA or something. I mean, the answer connects a bit to the previous answer because we can, like with these techniques, we can get a gradient for everything. And so it's not like in statistics, we often like to do two-step approaches, like first do a dimension reduction, then do the modeling. Or like when you look, for example, in terms of propensity scores, first determine your propensity scores, then do the modeling for your reweighted data. And this is like, this kind of with the neural networks enables something what the computer scientists like to call end-to-end learning. You get simultaneously a gradient for every single parameter in this. And this enables you to do things like say, because there are probably many potential low-dimensional manifolds that you could find in dimension reduction, but you can say, I want a low-dimensional manifold that has these specifically this and that property, and you express this via getting a gradient for everything.
Thank you. Thank you very much again. It's very nice. Small gift from
thank you.
And for the next speaker, who's Fabian Kreimendal, who holds a PhD in biostatistics and focuses his research on artificial intelligence and machine learning in medical research. He is currently at Johnson & Johnson in innovative medicine, and he is responsible for biostatistics and data management of clinical trials in Germany across indications with a focus on oncology and dermatology. And we're gonna hear a case study as soon as the slides are up. Just now. Already?
Sure.
That's
okay, perfect. Can you hear me all right?
Yes,
Sounds
perfect.
good. Okay,
Thank
perfect.
you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for the introduction. Also, warm thank you to the organizers, of course, and for inviting me to this talk. To be honest, I have changed my mind a bit about the talk that I want to give, especially talking about the direction that I want to go in. Basically, I wanted to show you a project about machine learning where I wanted to show you how I've approached it and what are the methods. And it was supposed to be a very technical talk because I'm happy to talk to lots of guys who understand what I'm talking about. When I present that at my company, people tend not to be able to follow it as much. But given the talks that we just had already, I think it makes sense to talk about, of course, I have been using Gen AI when I was coding, where I think Gen AI can help us, but also where I think what are the boundaries of Gen AI helping us when it comes to this coding. To give you a bit of background, what's been done here, this was a hackathon. Hackathon, I guess you know that. You put a lot of programmers or statistics or data scientists into one room. They have a problem to solve. The problem here was predicting TKI resistance in lung cancer patients. So every patient that has lung cancer will develop a resistance to a treatment. And the question was, what's the time to event that we can predict here? I started off with the literature research, of course. When the question is, what do you want to look at? I was asking the literature researcher, so what are the things that do influence the resistance? And the answer is molecular mechanisms. And that doesn't really help us at all, right? And this is the first part where I think it's important to use your own brain when you think, right? Because you can also just like ask Gen AI to say, use all the variables that we have and put them in there. But please make sure that you only use the relevant. And depending on which one you use, it will probably like exclude some that may be of relevance to us. So this is something that I think is important for us to consider, that we should also use our own heads when we get advice from Gen AI. Data imputation, which I think is a very, very important part. You don't have to bother with the numbers here. So basically the question that I was asking myself is, do I want to impute data or not, right? So I was coming from about 4,000 cases and I had 899 complete observations. What would Gen AI have told me if I'd asked it, do I want to impute the data or do I want to just like use complete cases, right? So this is a trade-off of quality over quantity, right? Which way to go? I mean, I could ask you, and I don't know, I don't think it's a clear-cut answer that we should impute or we shouldn't impute. I personally think that going with quality over quantity makes more sense. You may disagree, but also Gen AI may have an answer that is probably something between the lines of you can, but you don't have to. And then the next step is, of course, how would you want to impute the data, right? Do you want to just like do it with a mean or with the modus or a median or something fancy like multiple imputation or something even fancier like expectation maximization bootstrapping and stuff like that? So we should consider, does it really make sense to do the things that Gen AI is suggesting here? So I just used the complete observations. Next thing is that I asked the Gen AI, how do I approach this? So how do I approach a time to event analysis? Just like, not even talking about the coding, but just like the basics of the approach. And he said, and that was a good advice, I think. First look at if a variable does have an influence, right? Irrespective of the time. And once you figured that out, you can look at when is the influence. Because I would assume, and then again, it's important to think ourselves, that there are variables that may have a time variant effect, right? For example, some mutation may be not as, I don't know, maybe stronger at month 5 than at month 12, for example. That would be not a constant effect, but it would be time varying. So I started to look at if variables do have an impact, and you see the green ones here, those have, and the red ones don't. As a next step, I did a phi-k correlation analysis, and this is also something that Gen AI helped me with. I was going for something that is so fancy that it incorporates every variable here, irrespective of the scale. So this is nominal, this is ordinal, and this is also metric data. So I didn't just like use Spearman or Pearson or some, I don't know, phi. This is a phi-k correlation analysis that Gen AI suggested for me to use it. And okay, here, it also wrote the code in R. So I got this very nice metric. And when I see the significance metric here, I can go through all the cases and see, okay, which are dark blue, this is a good influence, like a strong one, and I can take those and I can pick them, I can cherry pick them, right? If I had Gen AI to choose what to do here, it would probably say, okay, I've got to find a cutoff somewhere, right? Because it knows I don't want to be overfitting, but then again, you also don't want to be underfitting. So what would be the right cutoff? And I think it's very reasonable here to also look at things that, like, do you want to include something that maybe makes no sense but has an impact? For example, color of hair, right? Again, I'll let the question open to you, right? There's no right or wrong answer to that. I would say no, but then again, somebody else would. This is something that Gen AI did not help me with here, and this is where we talk about time varying effects. What you can see here is you got the several variables that I looked at, and I wanted to know if the impact of variables is constant over time. And when you, for example, take height, okay, this is pretty much constant, right? It's a straight line. But if you do have varying effects, so for example, the effect starts off negative and then goes to positive, we see that we cannot use, for example, a Cox proportional hazard model because the assumption of proportionality would be violated, right? So I did not get much help here because GenAI did still suggest to use a Cox model, which I think is the wrong approach, just because we do see time varying effects here. This is what has been coming out here, and maybe I just don't bother you too much with that. So this is what I've created. I think this is more important. One thing that bothered me really, to be honest, when I asked GenAI which model should I run, it suggested gradient boosting. And I pushed back and said, why don't we run all the models that there are and just like let them compete to see which one is the best model? And it came up with some weird explanation that gradient boosting is the one to go and you should use it. It's very common and popular and so on and so forth. And I don't think that's the right approach. My personal opinion is if you should exclude those, of course, like Cox, for example, that violate the assumptions of what you're trying to do. But then you can just like put them all into one model, into one room, if you will, and just see which one performs the best, right? If I don't have a preconception of which model is the best, I could just like let them compete, right? So this is something where GenAI deviated from what I would do. And I don't want to bother with you with the results. This is not as important. I want to come direct to the takeaways. Focus construction of these algorithms on feature selection and be smart. Think yourself. Work cross-functionally with the medical team and with the regulatory team. You also have to think about what we're doing here with the research somehow needs to get to physicians, need to get to patients. If I tell a physician, yeah, this is a model that has been coded by GenAI, I'm not sure if he will believe me. And second of all, if I include variables that he thinks don't make sense, again, take color of hair, right? He would just be like looking at me and be saying, why would I use color of hair to predict TKI resistance? And this is kind of tricky, right? Because I would say, okay, if you don't include it in the model performs more poorer, right? But for him, it doesn't make sense to have it in the model. Imputation is not a must. Consider the trade-off. I mean, goes without saying. I would not always impute data. I mean, of course, when we're talking about real-world data, it may make sense because the bigger the data size, the easier it is to impute and the more reliable the results are. Yeah, exclude only those that violate assumptions. Fine-tune, fine-tune, fine-tune. This is also something that I think you can do if you connect an API to your model and say, hey, this is the model that I have fine-tuned, and I don't know, minimize the RMSE or whatever, or increase the accuracy with the AUC, or I want the smallest BRIA curve there is. I think that's possible, but honestly, it's also fun to do it yourself, right? So don't just let the AI take over. And with that, my final closing statement will basically be, we don't have to use an AI for everything, right? And it's going to be futuristic to think that we'll be replaced. We're smart, we're thinkers. So use the right approach whenever feasible. I don't think this is one where GenAI would have been the right way to go from the get-go. So in this case, this has been me. Yeah. With that, thanks.
Thanks, Fabian. Very nice. Do we have any questions? There is a question here. I'll start here, Marcel.
What's the question?
I'm sorry, I just missed why the inclusion of the hair color would help the model perform better.
Just because it did. That's the weird. Yeah, that's just the weird part, right? If I approach a topic like this, I don't have a medical background. I do have a understanding of lung cancer, but it's not in depth. So I just like, from a scientist perspective, use everything. I got all the information, and then I let data be crunched and see what comes out. And if I get the information, hair color is relevant, I include it, right? And if I then go to my medical team and they tell me we don't need hair color, then I would exclude it, but also give them the information, what's the drop in accuracy if I exclude a variable that just from a data scientist perspective is relevant.
I think there was a question here at the front.
Yeah, thanks very much. Seeing as you had the hackathon, can you go back and give some details about what was the best performing method and why it worked well.
Yeah, okay. Let's look at this slide. Fun fact, I was happy enough to win this one. We're 130 participants, and for some reason, my model won, right? I assume it's because of the fine-tuning, and some of the other groups also just like did gradient boosting. They probably asked GenAI and followed it. I'm not sure why. The model that worked best is called the conditional forest inference plot. And this is what it looks like. The real cool thing about the conditional inference forests is that it's iterative, and it puts more attention to the nodes that tend to give higher accuracy. It's very time consuming and resource draining, because every time it finds a new solution, it updates the whole tree. So this model that's the winner, it ran for like 48 hours, right? So it spreads the information through all the trees. It cuts the one that performed poorly. And every time it does it, it goes into the next level and adds another node. Does it answer your question, or would you like more details on that?
The other methods.
The other methods? Yeah, that's I also did GLM, GBM. This is GLM net. The neural nets were really poor, and I included also Cox as a comparator model, if you will. I'm not sure which direction question is going. Do you want more insights about the model itself? Or do you like?
I mean, just in general, when we pick these models, we have a large collection to choose from. And yes, we can run them all. It's good to have an idea what works well in which situations, and if you have insights as to why. I mean, what would you recommend for like the next hackathon?
Honestly, I would choose the same approach to really try again all the models, exclude the one that don't make sense, like Cox, for example, in this case. Just like see what performs the best. Of course, it depends on like the complexity of your data set, and the one that I worked with was very complex because you had different mutations, you had laboratory values, you had values over time, and conditional inference forest is a model that can very well deal with complex data structures. I personally think the reason why it's better is than GBM, because it's so time-consuming and iterative that it can better incorporate the whole complexity of the data. And it has like, I know this is just this example picture. It had like 37 levels of depth.
Thank you. Maybe just checking if there is a question online, or maybe there is a question here, if not.
One question has just arrived. Awesome talk. Have you used any AI-based agentic workflows for automating the data science ML pipeline?
No, I have not. I think that would be also something that I would try to do for the next one. So my thoughts going forward, if I would have to face another scenario, I would probably build an agent that I would connect with an API to my Python or R surrounding environment to let him alter the inclusion and exclusion criteria, for example, and also the variables that should be included, and give him the results to see if he then again wants to update his thinking. I think GPT-01 should be very good in doing that. I haven't done it yet, but I think that is a very fancy approach to go about it.
Thank you. I think we can thank Fabian again, and good for you. And I'm calling the next speaker, who is Tao Zhu. And Tao is a principal data scientist in the PD data science at Roche, and is currently working on development and validation of imaging algorithm to automate segmentation of lesions and quantification of lesion volumes from PET CT scans of lymphoma patients. And he holds a PhD in epidemiology from LMU, and is gonna talk about one of their case studies.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry,
Thank you for the
yes.
introduction. Thanks, thanks organizers for inviting me, and also have to thank my team to give me the opportunity to present this on behalf of the bigger team working on this effort. So today I would like to maybe not directly talking about the AI and algorithm itself, but I want to share with you a case study on how we try to use AI machine learning algorithms to tackle a potential medical clinical question, and the assessment that we have done to try to bring it closer to the clinical use or before it gets really enter into clinical use. So the algorithm is trying to automate the quantification of total metabolic tumor volume. So for those of you that might not be so familiar with this metric, so the total metabolic volume is a measurement of the total active lesion volumes from a PET-CT scan. So it's kind of a measurement of the tumor burden. It is interesting from a clinical perspective because it has potential prognostic values in certain lymphoma subtypes. It's related with the disease relapse, survival, and also the treatment failure. So here we have some case that has been reported in the literature on the different lymphoma subtypes and the relevant TMTV cutoff values. And in the bottom line, you see the difference in the 5-year PFS in these lymphoma subtypes. However, if we look into the current clinical practice or even in the clinical research for lymphoma, the adoption of the TMTV is not very wide. So the main challenge, as we see here, is that the measurement of this tumor burden largely rely on a manual process. And so first of all, so in the middle of this box, it described the general process. First of all, a certain threshold need to be selected by the radiologist to distinguish between the background signal and the lesion-related signal. So there were different criteria that can be used. Here I listed a couple of them based on the different absolute SUV values, or maybe the 41% of the maximum SUV values. And then the radiologists need to review all such cases to help remove the non-relevant lesions, or maybe to add lesions that are not above the threshold. As you can imagine, this is very tedious and very time-consuming process. So, and also the non-consistent or the different criteria that are employed at the moment in the clinical practice of quantifying the TMTV also hinders the optimal, to find an optimal cutoff of this TMTV value when trying to perform like downstream clinical applications, such as finding the high-risk populations or to evaluate the treatment outcome. So in Roche Genentech, we have put effort into to help using machine learning-based method to help tackle this issue. An algorithm called ATMTV, it's basically automated total metabolic tumor volume, was developed by our colleagues in Genentech. So this is an algorithm that is trying to fully automate the quantification, the lesion segmentation of the lesions in the FDG PET-CT scans for lymphoma patients. So the problem is tried to solve just directly related with all the problems that we have seen in the previous slide. It tries to quantify, so simplify the quantification of all the lesions, and then in a faster and automated manner, and also enable a more standardized approach to quantify it instead of letting the radiologist to choose different threshold in picking up the lesions. So this is the kind of high-level overview of the process. It goes from really the end to end for the reading of the PET-CT scans in the kind of radiologist workflow, So start from the selection of the relevant images. So here we will look at the full body scans and image pre-processing, lesion detection, quantification of each individual lesions, about their volume, and then the summary, and then also generating a final report of the matrix, so the TMTV value. So this model was trained leveraging the large late phase clinical trials from Roche. Model was firstly trained on the DLBCL patients from the Goya study. So 836 patients were included. And then they're from around 200 different study sites, really covering a very diverse population. And then the first assessment that we have conducted also leveraged the data from the same study and also an additional study extended from the patients in our training data sets, which are only DLBCL patients, which stands for diffuse large B-cell lymphoma patients, but also to the another lymphoma subtype, which is follicular lymphoma patients. So although it's a very complicated algorithm, deep learning based algorithm, but when we try to evaluate the performance of algorithm, the matrix that we picked are, as you can see, listed on the left-hand or right-hand side of the slide. They're traditional statistics. So we look at the Pearson correlation between the auto-TMTV read versus an expert radiologist. And we also try to analyze the bias and variance profile of the algorithm when compared with the expert radiologist. Something different, although TMTV is the major kind of measurement or of this algorithm, but to help also to the interpretability, to understand what exactly has been captured by the algorithm, we additionally analyzed the lesion detection performance of the algorithm, trying to see if the algorithm identified the true lesion, because it could be possible that you have calculated similar TMTV, but then it's not a relevant lesion area got detected. So too many numbers, I would just maybe skip or go through that very quickly. We have patients from Goya, 166, and then patients from Gallium study, 201 got tested. It covers a wide range of, with regard to the disease stages, as well as different type of disease, like whether involvement of bulky disease, number of actual nodal size, bone marrow involvement, and so on. So here I will just show some results from the evaluation. So here is the comparison between the auto TMTV read result versus the manual TMTV read result. Overall, the performance with regard to the correlation was in general good. It's above 0.95. And then looking at the bias and potential bias, the slope of the regression line is a little bit above 1. So if in perfect case, we should have a x equals y just as a dash line, but maybe due to some lower sensitivity in detecting the lesions for samples with low TMTV values, particularly at the end of the treatment, the performance maybe is slightly biased in the samples with lower TMTV values. So we see a slope deviated from the x equals y case. The average difference was in general very close to 0. When we look into the subgroups, as I showed in the previous slide, overall performance was consistent as what we see here. So this is the other part of the evaluation is related with the lesion detection. As also mentioned in previous slide, we see a slightly lower sensitivity and also the precision in detection of lesions with lower volume. So maybe going for the lowest or for the smallest lesion with a volume of 1 milliliter, the sensitivity is probably around 50, 60%. But once the lesions reaches over 10 milliliter, the performance is in general very good, above 90% for the sensitivity. I think also around above 80% for the precision of the detection. Yeah, that's basically what I said. So the last slide maybe is it's a kind of maybe an overview of how we think about bringing AI or machine learning based algorithm for clinical use. So first, it needs to get through, I think, these phases. So essentially there will be the model trained, model will get first tested to understand the full profile of such model. And then still need to get more of a prospective clinical validation to test the performance of these tools in the actual clinical setting and under the so-called intended use of these tools. AI algorithms need to go through rigorous training, testing, and a validation process before it can be used in the clinical practice. And this was what we are also trying to do for the ATM-TV as a next step. So yeah, that's all from my presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, Tao. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes, there is a question just here in the front.
Hi, thanks a lot for the presentation. In your example, you showed that you have 800 something patients, and it looks like it's image recognition. So my question would be, did you train the model from scratch, or because like 800 images for image recognition, personally I feel it's a bit, the sample size is not sufficiently high. So I don't know whether you train the model from scratch or you have some pre-trained models downloaded from somewhere else and you train afterwards.
So maybe I'm not the best person to answer this question because I did not get involved in the initial model training process, but my understanding is that it's trained from scratch because this is a very particular task, and then the heterogeneity of the data is not as large in like a general computer vision task that you want to build for an AI algorithm. So these are all like first line DL, BCL patients and use the data mostly from screening. So patients are not treated, they have significantly large lesions in the body, and then so relatively homogeneous task. I mean, I'm not saying that the population is homogeneous, but then overall, it's not as diverse as you want to train a general computer vision task.
I think we have, thank you. We have a question online or a personal question?
It's okay. A personal question. Thank you very much for your nice presentation. Maybe I missed one specific aspect, but could you go back to your scatter plot slide, please, where you had the automated and the manual one? And if I'm not misinterpreting things, then you primarily have these red dots just for the samples collected at the end of the treatment phase.
Right.
Do you have an explanation why, especially there, things seem to fail?
Yeah, because after the treatment, patients are maybe in remission, or they have good response to the drug. So the size of lesions are relatively small, and this is explained in this analysis where we try to look at the sensitivity and precision in detecting lesions. For the lesions that are small, the algorithm is not performing so well with regard to the detection and then the segmentation of the lesions. As we see here, they have lower sensitivity and precision. But yeah, and this is mostly the case in examples at the end of treatment where patients have remissions and then the size of lesions are relatively small.
Thank you. I know there would be a question, but in the interest of time, I'd like to move on to the last case study for this session, and then maybe this can be discussed offline. Thank you. Thank you. You get one. Oh, no, we don't have another, you can have, yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry. No, there is another one. Okay. Great. So the last case study is from the University Hospital Basel, and it will be presented by Christine Blackham, who is a senior physician in the Clinic for Radiology and Nuclear Medicine, and Matthias Mutke, also a senior neuroradiologist and they do research on AI tools in medicine.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to present a bit of a clinical side from the kind of end user. So we as radiologists, we have been the center of AI ridicule for quite a while now, even before large language models. So don't train new radiologists, you will be all replaced. And yeah, I'm very happy to share with the advent of large language models that we can now kind of share this anxiety a little bit with other professionals. So, but I can assure you predictions are uncertain and everything is going to be okay. So, and with that, we start with our case. It's actually a case about a tool we are using in clinical practice, an AI tool we are using. And there are many, well, talking points for us as end users. So what are the benefits? What are the challenges? How much evidence is there for the tools? And yeah, we kind of want to exemplify it with what we actually do have already. It's a tool called AI Doc, and Christine will show you later how that works. So the discussion is already at the very top of medicine, I'd say. That's the highest ranking medical journal. You all know it, New England Journal. And this is a recent publication, Current and Future State of AI Interpretation of Medical Images. So yeah, a highly debated and very relevant topic. And I took this figure out of the publication just to show you what the potential benefits for us as radiologists are. We have three main targets where we can apply AI tools. The first one is just to triage our workload. We have usually a long list of patients we have to see. We don't know which ones might have a serious disease, and we might be getting to them just later in the day. And a tool might tell us which ones to look at first or to look at last. Could also be nice. Then a bit more elaborate is the real detection of pathologies, for example, a lung cancer or a cancer anywhere else. And maybe a next step is the quantification of, which has been just presented before, quantification of such tumors or anything else. We just developed a tool to quantify very small aneurysms in the brain. Could be anything, is especially helpful because it's a tedious task, as has been shown before. But a big challenge, and this is a quote, direct quote from that very prominently published paper, there are very, very few, close to none, actually, randomized controlled trials, not even speaking of prospective ones, that show real safety efficacy of those tools. There's a real lack of real-world evidence. And, well, this can pose substantial risks to patients. And we basically don't know what those risks are and if those tools are actually useful. So we kind of have a pyramid of evidence that has been proposed for AI tools out of the American Journal of Neuroradiology, AI tools. And basically at the very bottom is the legal and regulatory frameworks, and goes up to the top for clinical efficacy. And yeah, as said before, we have hardly any data to support anything that we have on the very top of this pyramid. Especially if you want to get your tool FDA approved, you start at the bottom. You basically only have to provide legal and regulatory framework, and it fizzles out to the top on what you kind of have to provide. Actually, we just looked it up this morning. FDA approvals for AI tools over the last 3 months, there have been dozens. And if you look into the data, we couldn't find any studies on them. There were on most of them, there were no clinical studies. supporting that. So we would even have a problem just to choose which tool we could use in clinical practice. No evidence. They are marketed and yeah, kind of unpublished. So hand over to Christine, and she's showing you the tool we are actually using.
Okay, so this tool is called AI Doc, and back around in 2017, we started working with them in kind of a research collaboration. At the moment, this intracranial hemorrhage package is FDA approved, but before it was FDA approved, we were working in kind of a research collaboration. They were letting us use the software for free, and we were giving them feedback as to its reliability or even how the widget was working. I'll show you the widget in a second. But this is a CT scan of the head from a patient who came to the emergency room with a headache or with some weakness on the left side of his body. And it's pretty, I mean, you can see yourself that, you can see yourself, that there's something unusual on the right side of the brain, and this bright spot is an intracranial hemorrhage, and it's not, I would say, like if you guys can recognize it, I don't have to explain it too much, even though I do have a circle around it on the next thing. There. It's not too hard to identify, but nevertheless, the idea of this AI doc, what their little catchphrase is for their commercial selling, is that it's always on, it's constantly in the background, it's always analyzing the data, and it's supposed to be bringing urgent findings to your attention so that you are spared from drowning in your workload. And so that was the idea of the widget. So it pops up on your workstation and it tells you that there's an intracranial hemorrhage so that you can turn your attention to this case before the rest of your list, which is you have no idea what's included in that list. And then they had asked us for feedback, whether or not we agreed or disagreed. So it was kind of giving them also, after the initial training, it was giving them additional training as to whether or not their findings were correct. So we would say, is that a false positive or a false negative? And it would get sent back to them. And then over time, they added things like up at the top where it says IP, that means it's an inpatient. And over time, this disclaimer came that it's not for diagnostic use, for prioritization only. Then they added the final report on there so you could see it if you were coming at it later. And also they allowed you to toggle back and forth between the heat map and then the regular black and white CT images. But this is another example of something that might be more difficult to interpret. And I will show you that here on this native CT image, this one little linear, brighter line here is an intracranial hemorrhage, sorry. And that could be easily missed by someone who's going fast, but it was also missed by the AI program. Alternatively, on the other side, this like slightly sort of soft tissue, more dense tumor was detected as a hemorrhage, so that was a false positive, and therefore requires a human to interpret the surrounding findings in order to know that it was not hemorrhage. And then so what we did and what many places are doing after we're using the program for some time, and like I said, we didn't have to pay for it, but many institutions are paying for this. And what we did was look at the sensitivity and specificity of the program compared to the doctors, and whether or not it improved any kind of turnaround time for reporting or for the patient to leave the emergency room faster. And so we found, and then this is another paper that was recently published along the same lines, but a little different. And the reason why I want to say it's a little different is that these are doctors in hospitals who are just saying, hey, I have a medical student who needs a project. What can we do with this AI tool that we've been using? Let's look at, before the AI, after the AI, is our turnaround time different? Are we better at calling intracranial hemorrhage? And so we are just creating projects in our head. It has nothing to do with any regulation. It has nothing to do with, whether or not we, have time or energy to do a randomized controlled trial of the software versus the doctors. We just come up with our own ideas and use our own energy and resources to come up with a paper. So we, like I said, we did a retrospective evaluation of the diagnostic performance. We confirmed that their accuracy and predictive value was what other people have found. We did see a slight reduction in communication times and expedited patient disposition times. At the University of Alabama, they took a slightly different take on it, and they evaluated the doctor's performance before and after AI, and they found no difference in the doctor's performance and no change in their reporting times. But I mean, despite all this work that both universities put into it, we only use the widget, they only use the widget. We didn't have active work list prioritization. So what I mean by that is you could ignore the widget if you wanted to, or if it was like in the background on your computer and you didn't, for some reason or another, didn't see something pop up because you were getting a coffee and you didn't come back and check it, then you wouldn't be aware of the finding. So we both said, like many papers say, that it needs to have active work list prioritization. And then again, both of these studies, we are academic centers. We have subspecialized neuroradiologists. So this program cannot really make us any better because we are already really like at the top of our field. So if we're not as good as, you know, nearly 100%, then nobody else is going to be. So I hope that that illustrates that there really is a lack of standardized criteria or even a method or an approach or coordination among doctors to compare the products, compare their effectiveness. And unfortunately, then there are doctors who will then put their name on the product and say, oh, we use it and we love it. And because so-and-so at Yale or Harvard or whatever is using it, then that is unfortunately kind of an advertising bias that does get into the system. Yeah. Anything else?
No, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes?
Yes, I have.
You have the microphone?
Yes, I have full control. No, thank you very much. I really appreciate that we have to really talking from your practice. I recently read a paper which also said that the majority of FDA-approved imaging things haven't been clinically validated. What, excuse my ignorance, what is actually needed for an FDA approval for imaging? Because for a new drug, I'm well aware what's required, and certainly there's clinical evidence required.
Well, that's what we were talking about this morning. We can look up the FDA approval, and it has this 501c clearance, which is just meaning that it has like a substantial similarity to a prior product, which is probably just a computer-aided detection product. And in these approvals, they also provide their like internal data. But when I asked the AI program, Perplexity AI, I asked, has this data from this FDA clearance been published? And it said, no, I can't find any evidence that this was ever peer-reviewed or published.
Any other questions?
Thanks for a nice presentation. I'm trying to understand what is the benefit of this tool. It seems like it will do work for you when you're getting a coffee, but can you give us examples of where you could have efficiency gains? For me, I'm thinking where there is a lack of neuroradiologists, for example, but maybe that's just my biased perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those studies that we presented, those were academic hospitals with dedicated neuroradiologists, and this is an important point because those tools might be of much more benefit when they are used in an environment where people would not as easily recognize an intracranial hemorrhage. I mean, we deal with that every day, but there are smaller hospitals, rural hospitals, not non-specialized hospitals, that where it might be much more applicable. But there's no evidence on that. Someone should do it.
Yeah,
but,
so it would take somebody to say, let's evaluate a rural hospital and all of their head CTs and what was the turnaround time as opposed to an academic medical center. You know, but that takes, you know, someone's time, energy, and interest. It's not required.
Yeah, maybe one last question.
Yes, thank you for the talk. It's really nice insights to see, and I see that you have the same struggle as us as a pharma company. We have a lot of vendors that are coming with a nice product, but we can't use it. And did you ever try several little AI products like to boost your efficacy, like voice to text, combine text with image to get better outputs? You know, the issue is that one AI tool will not cover the whole process, but several simple ones for each task could be an option to, you know, get better output and help you in your daily work.
Absolutely. I mean, but one of the major problem is that the list of AI products that are available is huge, and we don't know which ones are good, which ones are not, and we have to. There are lots of problems after the development of the AI product. One, for example, is to apply all those, or to really help us in our daily workflow. This has to be integrated into the IT system, for example. Already big problem, right? So we would have to kind of manually, at the moment, fit together some sort of pathway workflow, which is, well, nobody has the time for that. That's the first thing. And then the second thing, and we don't know if the outcome at the end is actually, we need something with the clear numbers showing this has evidence that this is useful before we use it. And this would be sort of a trial and error system we have to set up, and nobody is daring to do that kind of.
And one last thing, we did try to go to the company and say we would be interested in sort of a text kind of image text combination or labeling or somehow with common data elements, inserting it into our report. And they did not take us up on that. So they have their own agenda. And what is interesting for us is not interesting for them.
So a bit of a way forward, I think, is it mirrors a bit in drug development, like investigator-initiated studies. So we are developing our own tools for exact problems that we know are a problem for us that might improve our workflow. So we are, developing our own tools. We are kind of tailoring them to our individual solution, and we get the evidence from our own study, and we kind of have an integration. We don't have to buy anything, so we just do it ourselves. Especially with base models, we use an NNUnet, for example, for segmentation. It's so easy to set up. We can train it ourselves. We have the people, the experts to do it. So we just do it ourselves, and we integrate it and we evaluate ourselves. And we are beginning to become quite successful with that.
Thank you. Before moving on to the next speaker, allow me to ask a small thing, because I very much liked your comment at the beginning. You're not alone anymore. And my question is, since you've been there before, how did you survive?
Oh, we just
so we can survive too.
We just kept going, you know, just pushing through. No, I think, it's a prediction. It's uncertain, and there's still a human in the loop. I mean, it will be. We will see what the future brings. We never know, but we just push through, kind of. no clear advice on that, to be honest.
Involves the patient, of course.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very nice. And yeah, we move to the last speaker of the session before the panel discussion. And this is Nicolas Perez, who is a data scientist at Swiss Medic, working on various things, machine learning and AI in this domain, I think. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So my name is Nicolas Lefleur Perez. You want to see a difference? Just I got married recently. That's the only difference. Today I'm going to be talking to you about a framework that we have started using in the unit where I work in Swiss Medic. I work in an innovation unit that is called Swiss Medic 4.0. And the idea of this unit is to bring innovative solutions inside of the organization. That's the whole point. Now, you can imagine that as a regulator, we have lots of constraints. The amount of security we have to respect, the lack of APIs that we can use. These kind of things are hard constraints that we have to deal with.
When we bring these solutions into the organization, how do we do it? What are the main things that we have to look at? This is what this framework is all about. Now, what I'm going to be sharing with you today, and I can imagine that you see this coming, this should not be taken as guideline for the industry. This is something that we take as internal use. Like I mentioned, I work for a unit called Swissmedic 4.0. This unit was created around 2020, and it was meant to last for 5 years, at least until next year. It's 7 people plus interns that come to us and rotate. And it's meant to be an innovation lab where we can develop things fast, which in a regulatory agency is kind of like an interesting way to approach things. The idea is to promote interdisciplinary work within the agency, move a little bit away from individual departments, but try to find solutions across all of these departments. This is what we would like to imagine. Like if you were to prompt one of these models and you would like to imagine how it would be to work in a regulatory agency, we would like to say that everything is data-driven. But we all know that it's a little bit too far away from where we are. Nonetheless, inside of the organization, we clearly see, and the organization is really full of scientists. So even though there's a lot of paperwork to be done, the agency is full of really forward-thinking people. So when we're with our colleagues, we constantly follow into some of these buckets of where innovation is very clear to be something that we want to approach or something from which we can profit. And these are big areas where the organization really looks closely at. So the first one on the top left, you see automated data analysis, risk assessment, monitoring and compliance, and detection of illegal activities. Today, I'm going to be talking about this framework that I'm talking about, so regulator in the loop. And particularly, I'm going to be showing to you 2 use cases that we have developed inside of the organization, inside of Swissmedic. One of them is in the area of risk assessment, and the second one is in the detection of illegal activities. Now, we do a lot more, right? So there are lots of projects, lots of things that are on testing phases, or that are POCs, or things that have been maturing over time, so are more solid applications. Nonetheless, I wanted to take these 2 applications that we have done because I like very much how they work, and I like very much the interaction that's generated with the stakeholders inside of Swissmedic. So the main challenge that we face, I'm going to move a little bit away from machine learning in general and how do we optimize people, workers, tasks that we do. I'm really thinking about regulatory processes. And the challenges that we see when we're implementing these kind of systems is that the regulatory environment is very strict. Things have to be done properly. And in general, we like this, right? So when you are looking at new medical devices or new medicinal substances, you want the process to be as reliable as possible. You want more people to be looking at the same process. You want interdisciplinary teams to meet to discuss the same topics. This naturally makes the process a little bit slower if you have to bring a bunch of experts together. But we want this. So this is really a core strength of the organization. But that means that systems that we don't understand well, we reject them. We want traceability, we want logging, we want understanding the models. So models that are a bit more transparent, we like that. Systems that are very complex and we cannot trace back how they make decisions, we don't like that too much. So machine learning falls in this gray area where random forests, we like that. A very deep neural network, maybe a little bit less. So how do you make it more transparent? This is kind of like the main question that we have had for the last 4 years. And the main thing that we have come to conclude on these 4 years is that when we focus on trust with the stakeholders, we succeed. So the more that we focus on that trust, building trust with the individual inspector that will use the application, focus on what they're looking at and how they perceive success. That's what we need to focus on to make these applications succeed. So why is it crucial? I already mentioned regulatory agencies in general have a little bit more this flavor of errors should not happen. So anything we can do to avoid those errors, we don't want to minimize them, right? We don't want them at all. So this is important. Trust is crucial because we want to maintain this traceability. So as much as we can log how decisions were made, how the model run, when the model run, which date, how many times, these kind of things. We like the traceability. A system, like I said, that regulators do not trust will not be effectively used. This is kind of like, if they're not well educated as well as about the tool, they will just not generate this positive feedback about the technology that we're developing. And I keep coming back, trust, transparency, traceability. These are the things that really we've noticed that push us forward. And one last thought on this aspect of trust is, and this is, I'm gonna throw some words about the team in general that I work with, is a very non-stereotypical view of developers. Everyone is extremely social. Everyone is very focused on people and openness in communication. And this was a very specific profile that was recruited for this team. So the team, if you look at these people, we are everywhere trying to have coffee with people, trying to talk, trying to sit down, trying to invite them for meetings, trying to have lunch together so that we can understand how they, at the individual stakeholders, how they tick, right? We want to understand them because that helps me as a data scientist to do my job better. So the framework, generally based in these bubbles, at the very core, we as data scientists in this team, we don't see ourselves as we do technology and we program and I like Python and TensorFlow. We see that this is a small percentage of my work. My work also includes trying to improve the organization and its processes, and we focus a lot on human relationships. So technology is an assistant to what we want to achieve overall. And more than that is the fact that we try to work in an agile manner, which again, for regulators is hard in a regulatory landscape. Working with agile methodologies is challenging, doable, but challenging. Bringing this data literacy about how these models work and why should we trust them. That's a huge part of my work as well. And how do we come to these solutions to the very bottom with design thinking that also matters. So the framework that we developed has been sort of like surfacing through these projects, and it actually took shape this year, mostly because we discussed a lot on we're gonna have a new project. What are those things that we have to focus on? This is why this framework for us has been surfacing. And as I've thoroughly mentioned already, we're very focused on trust. And we have two backbones that we constantly come back to when we're talking with our colleagues. So this is something that I talk with the stakeholders, I talk with the developers, I talk with external parties that are involved in the stuff that we do. We tend to go back to, today we're gonna be talking about the technical backbone. We're gonna be talking KPIs, we're gonna be talking about what did we deploy, which techniques we're using, which APIs we're using, and we try to convey as clearly as possible this technological part. But then we have this other part, which is the show and tell. And so we also have in each one of these projects, like in any agile-based framework, every few weeks we have a meeting and we show what we do. And we show as little technical as we can. So if we can avoid the technical altogether, we do it. The idea is to show you, to show the stakeholder, what did we do? How does it improve your life? What does not work? Which metric failed with the new model trained? And how are we planning to address that? So we try to approach this in a way that we move away from technology, we move away from these technical discussions where I know that the people in my team, they're very happy to say, well, this week I was working in deployment in infrastructure and I created this Docker container and they're super excited to share this because this is what they did. But we have to sort of like lower this component in the conversation and we focus much more in the value directly to the user. So basically the way that we have done it is that we divided in these three sections. We spend a minimal time in business understanding for each of the POCs that we build. We try always to have one regulatory expert, always one of them, a product owner and a software architect that can communicate in the very beginning. the expert usually stays with us for a long time. So for example, in one of the projects that I'm going to be sharing with you today, one of the experts has been with us for roughly 4 years. When we start developing, we do not want to outsource a lot of what we do. So if we are specifically getting support in specific tasks of the development, we try to bring that on board as much as we can. That's, for example, what my role is. The data science doesn't go anywhere else, not to an external involved party from a university or something like this with whom we may collaborate. The idea is the data scientists in the team, they keep the knowledge in-house. This is super important for us. So some of the developers in every project we do will be from the regulatory side. So in this case, kind of like I switch hats from data science to regulator back and forth. And we try to always do the work iteratively. So we avoid waterfall approach as much as we can. We try to do everything agile to find the feedback from the users as fast as we can. And once we do one of the small development phases, maybe 4 months, 6 months of development, then we focus on monitoring tools. Then we go into maintenance of these applications, but we try to keep that conversation with the experts. Did it help you? We often try to deploy actually monitoring tools that allow them to look in real time what the models are deciding. And this is a lot to do with this trust that I'm talking about, but also for us to have the peace of mind that we don't see data drift or we don't see some kind of lack of robustness on the models. At least we can see what's happening in real time. So now I switch gears and I go to each one of these use cases. So the first case that I'm going to be presenting to you is called Trisha. And the goal of Trisha is the risk-based triage of medical device incidents. The idea here is that when a medical device is in the market, it may fail sometimes. For some devices, picture a thermometer, you may not care. You may just throw it and buy another one. But some other medical devices, it might be critical that is as good as possible in the market. So in this case, if there's someone in the mountains hiking and suffers an incident, rescue team comes to help and the defibrillator fails. That's a bad scenario, right? So in that case, you have a low probability of that incident, a high severity, and a low detectability. Why am I talking all of a sudden about these three very specific keywords? Probability, severity, and detectability. This is a standard that we use internally and that we have used for years. But when the data science team came along, we overtook the process that's been working and that's been working well for a while. We focus on these three categories with the idea of saying, well, we need to see how probable this scenario is, how severe, and can we detect it or not? Each one of these categories, traditionally, as per the standardization that exists for this protocol, each one of these ones will be evaluated from 1 to 10 by an expert. Multiplying these scores and giving you a maximum score of 1,000. So every incident will fall somewhere between 1 to 1,000. This is done traditionally by hand. Someone with experience, with a background, will look at free text, so an incident report. They will assess the probability, they will assess the severity, and they will assess detectability based on their experience. You can imagine that depending on the background you have, if you have a medical background or an engineering background or a computer science background, depending what your experience is, your assessment will also change. So the idea here is to establish that this case was high risk and need to be addressed fast. So Swissmedic in this case will take contact with the manufacturer to address the situation. How does it work in Trisha? So what we did is that we went to the database and we trained 3 different models. I put here BERT. We have done a bunch of studies with other embedding systems. We have tried all kinds of things. This was good enough for the stakeholders. And the normal workflow that happens is that we start with an incident report that gets imported into our system. The models establish the risk class, which now is automated through these 3 individual models. Then we have a validation by the expert, and we retrain the models. This is our process. Now, I'm just focusing on what are we doing with the machine learning part of this, but as I've said before, the goal of the unit in which I am participant on is to serve value to the users. So often the machine learning tends to be a small component of what the team does. What we often do is to develop a very friendly user interface that they can access in the most easy possible way from their workstations with the infrastructure that already exists in the organization. So a big part of this for us, so data scientists that are trying to bring value directly to the user, is in the whole experience. We tested this and we got really great results. So much that the experts starting to push themselves for how can we integrate it into our processes in a more robust way. In the beginning, when we started this, we had about 10,000 entries as a gold standard. This was something that we cleaned up. So it was quality data in certain ways. Anyone could question this part already. But what we see is that per year, there's roughly 7,000 cases, increasing at the rate of about 10%. So when you look at Tricia itself as a tool that could first harmonize how different people evaluate the same reports, because now they get a default suggestion, but also the fact that now you start changing the mindset inside of the organization that maybe you don't need to make these teams bigger by adding people. Maybe we can start scaling with these kind of tools. So the way that we invest our resources also changes. We did many analyses, we tried many models, we settled on the one that I showed before, and we defined the KPIs that were important to us. We had feedback from the regulators inside of these teams, so inspectors, people that are doing this work on a daily basis, every 2 weeks, and did multiple phases of development. So now I'm showing you here these 2 phases that we did. Through experimentation and through this open communication, we were able to deploy the first version. Then we developed a second version, and this version was improved. We built on the feedback from the users. We replaced some of the KPIs. So it was a learning process with them. As we move from version 1 to version 2, we see also the entire application and the team as a whole mature a little bit on how do we provide this value. The second use case that I'm going to be sharing with you is a use case that is called Nightcrawler. And the goal of this application is to automate the search of illegal medical products on the internet. So the basic scenario that you can picture in your mind is you want to buy a medicament. Your probable first step is to go into your phone and check out where can I buy it. Maybe some of them are pharmacies that you know, pharmacies that could be close by in the station or something like this, and you can go physically to get this medicament. But more and more of e-commerce websites are appearing, popping up everywhere, and younger generations are more friendly with these kind of websites. So they're more willing to accept that I just order online. If that should be taking place or not, that's a different question. Some of these websites may be selling something that should not be sold online, right? So this poses a question. The easier that life gets with accessing the internet and ordering online, the harder it is for us to monitor that online market. So usually, if something like that was to happen, that someone buys online and this doesn't go well, and the medicament has side effects, the person wants to complain to someone, they would complain to us. They would send us an incident report, or they would somehow take contact. Could be a doctor, could be a private matter, but we would get a report of this incident. And then the market oversight would immediately take the case serious to explore where else can you find such a product. Oops. So what did we do here? There's an entire application that we built around here, but I do not want to show you the application. Here I'm showing you how did we build up the logic behind. We took historic labels. We classified a model asking the very basic question of, is this relevant or not? It's a binary classification. We took lots of products that are crawled online. Those that are filtered for Swiss relevance were used for this relevance classification. The products, again, are evaluated by the experts, and we update the models. So basically, the idea is very simple. We collect as many websites that we can online. We process them in some way. We show them to the experts, and the experts keep evaluating if that recommendation is correct or not. What I like very much about this one, and I have on the top Medicrawl, this is, we have been transitioning from a Medicrawl version to Nightcrawler. This is what I just said before. This has to do with the fact that Medicrawl has become extremely efficient at the Swiss marketplace. But we have a lot of collaborators from international agencies that want to use the same tool. So now we're migrating to a new infrastructure where we support multiple marketplaces and we collaborate with other agencies. We're collaborating with other countries on this project already. This project is very mature. So this one we've been working on for about 4 years now. We had a first version. It was not a good version, but it was a version. We were initially collecting URLs. We were processing them. We did some initial machine learning. But why do I say it was not the best version? Because we did not have any data available. So when we trained these models, we had something like 1,000, 2,000 labels that we did by hand. This was a tedious process. We had to do multiple experts checking these URLs and telling us, what do you look at in each one of these URLs to say that you want to actually see it in the system or not? What do you want to have filtered out? The experts, again, were with us in the POC, and they were, like I said before, they want as much accuracy as possible. They were very resistant to a system that does not crawl the entire marketplace. We want every single product that you can do online in this automated version. We started with a second version, and then we started increasing the amount of the data set by a lot. So the amount of labels that we had to train our models were much higher. And we started adding this monitoring of performance with the stakeholders. So in the beginning, there was a monitoring, but it was directly discussed with the stakeholders. In the second version, we started building more standard tools, so the way that we could reproduce results for them. Over time, this was about a year ago, a little bit over a year ago, we had something like 50,000 labels, plus, so like these are manually labeled scenarios, plus 10,000 individual cases analyzed by the tool. So people going through individual cases with the tool, which meant that now we could look at individual behaviors. We noticed, for example, at this stage, that people from the medical device team behave differently than the medical substance team. So we had to separate this in individual machine learning pipelines. So one model for devices, one model for substances. And this helped to improve very specific performances on these teams. So for the ones that work with medicinal substances, devices are actually removed from the pipeline. We established more robust benchmarks, and now we could actually tell people, this is how we benchmark at every stage of development the answers for you, and we could communicate more clearly. And now we're moving into this fourth version. So I'm gonna go back to why I said that there was a change in name. Version 1, 2, 3 was only inwards looking. So just looking at Swissmedic and the Swiss market. But we started noticing from the stakeholders that there was something that they still didn't fully trust. And it was the fact that many of these URLs come from individual marketplaces that are outside of Switzerland. So how can you keep the entire Swiss marketplace safe, so to say, when some of those URLs come from other countries? There may be another country where the seller claims that they can deliver in Switzerland. So this becomes relevant to us, even though we have no jurisdiction. So it's a complex problem. And this also now invites the logic why we want to collaborate with other agencies. So it's been a learning process. The tool has been growing, maturing, and become more efficient over time. But this is in construction. So if you were interested in these kind of approaches and what we're doing now we're fully migrating to language models that we can prompt in a very similar level of efficiency, because that approach of the 50,000 manually labeled cases, we cannot do that for every country. It's just too much effort. We have benchmarked this with LLMs, and yeah, we're seeing that might work very well. Nonetheless, there are many challenges. There are many things that we see that are complicated when you scale these kind of pipelines, especially when you do this kind of separations per country. And it remains to be the most important thing for us that we stay focused on our stakeholders. So when I talk with the inspectors from the market oversight, they are my key stakeholder. If they're happy, then the team is successful. If I can summarize the results for each one of them, is that for Nightcrawler, we've definitely improved the performance of the stakeholders. So the inspectors now inspect a way larger amount of URLs, or at least this is what the tests that we have run show. The estimation, this I can tell you just from experiments that we have done, but the estimation is something between 4 times more to 10 times more what they can do without the tool. This has to do with the fact that we go picking into individual e-commerce websites and not just what search engines generate. We have something around that 80% hit rate. This varies per model and per domain that we are analyzing. But that means that even though we have some percentage that we miss, when you consider the scaling that we're doing with how many websites we find, it's still much more successful than people without the tool. And this is something that this trust concept was hard to bring into this kind of project. When you don't have something close to 100%, how do you convince your stakeholder that this is still better than doing it without the tool? And this has been the challenge that we have been addressing over the last few years. And for Tricia, we have definitely been able to standardize the triage process. We've definitely reduced the amount of manual workload. We've added traceability, so every decision is clearly traceable. We have also run tests with round tables of experts and noticed that now they also criticize themselves. Like they think about their own work more, in that the different expertise of each one of us on the table brings a different way to evaluate an individual case. So the way that we understand the free text that comes in the incident report will be different based on the expertise. The language model will provide a unique answer. So if we can somehow develop this more, develop it further in the future, it may provide a point that we can always look at as a reference. And clearly the point that we have this high accuracy in the risk assessment has definitely brought the trust of the stakeholders back to us from a starting point that they were more skeptical that the tool would do what we thought it could. And that's everything from my side. We do think that trust is important. We do think that the closer that we work with the stakeholders, the better the job that we do. That trust takes different shapes. Sometimes it means that we communicate in the right way, the right metrics. For other people, it means that they see a lot of elements in a dashboard. It depends. And this is maybe the main point that I hope to leave you with as a takeaway, that continuous communication with the stakeholders. That's what we have found to be the key player to make the project succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Perhaps, I don't know if we have time for a quick question for the audience, or we probably move straight to the panel and discuss any questions in the panel, because I think this is a great time to move to that discussion on the note of trust. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Great. So I'd like to invite all of the speakers up today for the panel. Is that how we were going to do this? And yes, and we also have folks online. So if you remember to unmute yourself before you start talking. Do we want chairs? Sure. Or we could just go. Yeah, can you stand for 20 minutes? Cool. And I want to thank all the speakers and the organizers for having this great session today. I think it was a wonderful tour of some of the possibilities that we've discovered recently in AI. That we started with a session on AI for automation, and Erkan showed us that we might all get to drink more coffee while the computers program by themselves. And then other speakers reassured us that no, we might still have to check on how the computers are doing. And then we moved into the second session where we looked at some of the clinical applications and small data applications in AI, and the place where humans still need to be involved and still need to work to build trust. So we need to bring all the panelists in closer. I don't have to be on camera, but all of you do. So that would be awesome. And I'll start off with maybe a leading question to get us started, and then we can go off script to all of you. So we're all, a lot of us are here today with data science and statistics backgrounds, and we'd like to know and have you discuss what are the most immediate applications of AI and machine learning to add value in drug development, in clinical research, and in patient care today? Is it workflow acceleration? Is it resource replacement? Is it some combination? And I would be happy to hand over the microphone.
Some of the talks today seemed a little bit like this is disruption or something, and everything will be different. But I guess, the question is similar. You could have asked like, what were the most immediate results of like having Google as a search machine around in 1997 or something? You just used it everywhere where you could because it was such a cool thing to have around at that time. And so I think the question isn't just like, yeah, will some area be spared and the others, yeah, they have to take it on with a grudge or something. It already is, I guess, as we saw, it is everywhere, and everybody will use it just as we used Google or started using Google in 1997. And the world was different.
I'll keep it short in the sense of time. I think we need to understand what Gen AI can do for us and where it can help us. And we need to focus on the areas where it's really a benefit for us and where it's not a benefit for us. And when it comes to regulatory approval, I think we should start with the projects that we have and take small steps forward, not trying for the big moonshot, if you will.
Yeah, I would say here that you can basically use those methods everywhere where you have data, right? And also in the process of getting more data, they can be used as well, right? So for the pre-processing part, we usually have in the pharma industry, have a lot of data that's like in different silos, not harmonized. So even in those steps where we want to bring the data together so we can leverage it downstream, I think AI could be used there as well. So the workflow acceleration, for example.
Yeah, very quick answer. I'm a clinician. I think the most useful AI tool is the one that benefits patients in the end.
Yeah, just want to add here that I think the power of this AI tools initially was to translate human language. And we figure out now we can use the tools to translate human language to computers. And we just learning programming to interact with a computer. And I think this will be changed over time. In the future, I doubt that we will do a lot of programming and we will do more QCing of our code. And I think that's the big impact.
Can I ask a question on that note? Because this was also through the talk and maybe through some of the other ones, is a lot of QC. So, well, generative AI, they can generate huge amounts of data in very little time. How much data information do we have to QC? One. Two, where do we learn the skills to do so?
It's a good question. So I would say like the whole QC, the programming part will move to QC. We will QC a lot at the beginning because the technology is new. Everyone is new on that. We have to learn how to talk with that, how to use it. If we stick to that, as I mentioned with Google Maps, at one point you trust it and you trust the tools. It's like, entering the car, you trust the engineer that this tool brings you from A to B. And this will be the time when we use Gen AI tools like this.
I think we have another question in the room.
Maybe I can add to that. So we mentioned in our talk that human involvement is important. We strongly believe that, especially human with domain knowledge. So for example, in our talk, we mentioned systematic literature review. So if we are working with somebody who doesn't even know what ASLR is, this doesn't make sense.
Awesome, thanks. Sorry, you want to go?
No, I just wanted to add that on this issue of QC, it's a big thing for the literature reviews, right? Because if I run a search and I get 10,000 records and I say generative AI, use this inclusion exclusion criteria to give me the responses. It does it in 5 minutes. So the question is, do I need to check the 10,000? In which case, maybe I didn't need a generative AI tool. And I think that that's one of the things that we need to work, think about generally as a community to come up with benchmarks that we can refer to. We need to know when to stop. This happened with the ranking algorithms, for example. Up till now, it's still not clear when you stop when you're using a ranking algorithm for screening. And it seems like we walk away from it and we then allow each individual to come up with their own cutoff points. But we need to have a conversation as a community, really, like it's something we have to find a way to embrace and deal with head on.
But maybe adding on the QC part, also arguing that it's not so different. I mean, because when you look at what we're doing before at universities, we were supervising doctoral researchers where we had to make sure that the code that they're programming doesn't do strange things. Or like when you say, like in a regulatory field, you want to use some R packages, you need to make sure that the R package that was developed in some academic project doesn't do any weird things. So I guess we have all this experience, and now you can, I would say, rather simply transfer this to the new setting. I would also argue this isn't so different because we have been doing this in the examples I mentioned for quite some time.
Thanks. So you're all technical people. You're either a clinician or a data scientist. The theme that I hear is practicing AI. You're a practitioner of AI. What kind of skills did you gain that you will continuously use now? And then what I hear is also domain knowledge. Do you think you're a better searcher in Google because you have better domain knowledge? Does that mean that the more senior or more expert you are in your field, the better AI practitioner you will be?
Well, since I mentioned domain knowledge, maybe I can jump in here. So by training, I'm a statistician, but I like to say, and Nikos knows about this, I like to say I'm a statistician, but I know enough data science to be dangerous. So I think, to me, I think that's probably the sweet spot. I'm, of course, still a statistician, but I need to know enough data science to be able to discuss data science with data scientists.
So when I think about this, I think the vision that we should have is not creating a hierarchy where, it's reserved for a group of people. Like Harold was saying, like the vision that we probably want to view is the possibility for everyone and anyone that does the kind of work that we do, irrespective of whether they're entry level, they're an intern, they're a student, or they have 50 years experience, they should still be able to do what they can do. And I reflect on one of the slides that I had, for example, like in my head, I'm thinking if I have a manager arrangement, it's possible that there is someone that doesn't have experience with conducting literature reviews. So the manager can actually cross-check with them to say, your question is not clear enough. Are there other things that you want me to think about when setting up, this workflow for you and initiating this project? So I wouldn't say that it's something that, people will get better at it, right? But not everyone knows how to use Google very well to start with, right? But then we all use it. So there's a concept of prompt engineering, but I think it's going to go away in a way after a while. Like, the average person doesn't really need to understand how these prompts work. I don't know how my car was constructed, and I still drive it.
I was just going to say something similar, like in medicine with training, we often complain that the younger people have it so much easier because of Google, for example, or for any number of reasons, devices. And we might feel like we had to learn it the hard way, but it just moves, time marches on and progress moves on, and then we just get used to it, as you were saying, and we drive cars and use phones and don't understand how they work. But I did want to say before I forget that it's been so important to me to see that we're all facing the same problems and issues, and this is such a fabulous seminar because I don't know anywhere else where I would have been able to share this information or been able to learn about the problems that everybody is facing. So thank you. Yes.
So something that on a personal level, so it's more on a personal level, I can tell with my friends, people that I trained with, there are like two camps. Those that are fully embracing these kind of things, to program, for example, full throwing ChatGPT or Claude to figure out how to generate good quality code. And those that are more traditionalist and they say, no, I don't want to use this. I know how to code, so I'll do it myself. And I see these two camps very clearly. Those that are embracing the code generation, it's not that they are lazy. These are very talented people. And I notice how they are thinking often about the individual coding task may become irrelevant soon. And where I need to be focused on is on the architecture of things. How do I connect concepts that are much more abstract and much more difficult to convey to machine learning system? Because there I can fully contribute. That will not be taken away at least for 2 years. No, maybe longer.
Yeah, maybe I also want to add something, and also maybe also a reflection on the first question related, like which areas might be impacted most from AI in the future. Because if you look at overall, it's an IT kind of tool, and if we take this Google example, if we think about what has changed since the Google comes to the IT world, is that we all get to Google to search for information. So I think like also the information that everyone gets will kind of get standardized because Google always pops to you this and that information. So from this AI, maybe in the future what we will face is also a standardized knowledge in certain parts. So and maybe also it's related with what you said, like it's easier for the future generation to look into certain problems because there's a standardized answer coming from either Google or maybe in the future such a generative AI bot. So to a certain extent, this may simplify things, but also on the other hand, meaning that part of like standardize, anything that we want to standardize might be easier if we want to put that into such a tool and then get future generations to get faster in get themselves familiar with these knowledges. Yeah, I think that's the part I think that will be impacted by AI in large, maybe in the near future, and yeah, and also it's actually a good opportunity for the newer generation to pick up the expertise level by using such tools.
I just want to comment here again that the whole topic of Gen AI, where people get afraid to replace, we're talking here about people which are high educated. There are skill sets which normally you go to university to learn this domain knowledge. This is done by AI. So the simple jobs will stay the human-made because we don't have the robots that are doing the task. But nowadays we can see that AI is everywhere. You don't see it because you don't know it. If you register to any homepage or something, there's an AI bot who make the decision if you get the loan at the bank or not. There's already a lot of machine learning and AI in all the decisions every day that we do, but we don't see them, and we're not aware of that because we don't care about that. And the reason why we're using that is to make our lives easier. And I think that's the human mindset, that we love to outsource everything. I think this will be in the future a big issue.
I think we have some questions online. Could we?
Yeah, just a small counterpoint to that. I feel like, especially with the coding example, it could also be used as a tool to make me more creative, because when I code, there are often parts that are more tedious that I would like to let the ChatGPT suggest me something so I can focus more on the creative parts. And I feel like that's also kind of an aspect.
Sorry, I just have to say here, I agree, but I'm working like over 10 years in industry, and there it's kind of about productivity. We want to, drug to the market. We talk about numbers, money, time. We want to support the patients. We want to be faster. And with that, we don't have so much time for creativity. That's the reason why we're living in this big machinery, that we try to be much more efficient. And that's, I think, it's the balance between we want to be creative, but we want to be fast.
We've got a series of questions from online, and we can't really handle all of them. There are 3 topics I would like to specifically mention. We've had it before to some extent, but here there are some more detailed questions. The first one is about concerns about reproducibility. How can these models be made reproducible? I think that's number 1. The second one is related to it. We've seen a couple of comparisons of ChatGPT and humans, but have you compared it with other open source LLMs? And the last one is, okay, do we really need to go for these models? When are they really superior to standard statistical approaches? That's the last question.
Maybe I can start off with the first one. So how should I, can you read the first question again? Yeah, okay. So we have to keep in mind that everything we do with AI and data science is based on math and statistics. And that also means, I don't have to tell you guys this because you're a technical audience, statistics is just like the controlling of probabilities. That means we don't have to reproduce everything perfectly exactly to be trustworthy. This is also why ChatGPT gives you different answers if you tell him the cat played in the park or whatever. Sometimes it's a funny picture, and sometimes it's green, sometimes it's raining, or whatever. We just have to be certain enough when it comes to reproducibility. But then again, we don't want that always when we're talking about creativity and some new ideas. That would be my take on it.
For the because I think that the question specifically mentioned us, and I'll turn it to Nikos, but this is a really, really good question about reproducibility, because we actually run into this challenge. Nikos, maybe you can.
Yeah, thank you. My simple take, currently now is like, probably you know that there is a factor that you control the randomness, right? Temperature. The other thing, very basic stuff here, right? You just do multiple iterations, like we use 3 polymaths, 3 iterations. You do it multiple times. And I guess then, as the previous speaker said, then you probably diminish the randomness and increase reproducibility. But in the end, let me say that even if you're doing a systematic literature review with humans, there is always some randomness, right?
Yeah, so I can try to take the second one, like with the different large language models. the thing it's rather difficult because there's so much movement in the market. So we were all surprised with ChatGPT and GPT 3.5, and now we have Llama 3.1, like where the medium-sized one you can have nearly on your laptop, and it's in performance-wise on the level of GPT 3.5, and so like. The challenge in evaluating this is like, what do we actually compare? Because by the time you have the paper out, it's totally outdated. But I think this is the pessimistic view. It's like you can say if you're willing to always switch to the latest models, you don't have to care so much about the difference between the models, because there is not like this one market leader that you need to figure out. Basically, the whole market is playing this game of chasing each other, and so like it's difficult to pick the wrong model if you just say, hey, I'm always willing to go for the latest ones.
To come back a bit to the QC topic, all of us here now have trained and worked in a pre-LLM, pre-large language model, whatever environment. So we are kind of all experts already, and we've written protocols, or you've looked at MRI images, we've trained before that. But if in the future the next generation has never had the chance to develop their own generative analysis skills or code writing skills, are they going to be as effective as QC as we old school people have?
It's an interesting question, but sometimes when I look back, I think we've been at this point many times in the past. Like in the 70s, the calculator was introduced to the accountants, and everyone was like, "Oh, are we going to trust this? Are we going to know it's going to do what it's doing?" And maybe everyone in this room was born then. But, for the younger generation, they never had this world in the past where, they had to take a pen and then write down calculations like, proving like, okay, this math equation works the way it should work. In fact, today, when you go to a primary school, they start out with a computer. So their world, like the world for those, like this group of people that you refer to, I think is going to be completely different from the world that we are in. And it's probably the challenge for some of us, right? In trying to acquire the skills related to be able to use generative AI for our work. We still need to be able to balance, with balance the upskilling of ourselves with regards to what we do today. So it's a big thing that needs to happen for some of us now, but for the people in the future, I think it's going to be completely different.
Yeah. So just since we talk about the near future, just to move the clock a little bit forward. So do you think, like, maybe for example, in 2 years, you're gonna have, let's say, a board director, board meeting, or global development team where they're actually using AI to at least in part support the decision making, especially with the advent of these kind of general or organizational AI that you mentioned, in the last slide of the first speaker. Just to pick your thoughts on that.
Okay. I think we are not at the point where we give AI the option to make decisions. We as a human will make the last decision at this point, else we would be by AGI. But I still think in the future there will be more tasks that we will outsource. I mean, we do that already. We give coding, a lot of coders are Indian. We outsource a lot of tasks that we are not doing anymore because we focus on different things. And this will be also the case, that we use more and more technology and focus on more on science or other tasks. I hope I could okay.
I have a question about the regulation. You mentioned that there are some aspects where you just have to evaluate in a clinic how a system works or how a tool works. What do you think, what can we do that this is not an an option for the clinic, but some regulatory agency, maybe the two of you or three of you can elaborate.
I think that's a larger problem in medicine and not just narrowly focused on AI. I mean, and this is also in reference to being a knowledge expert that, we have examinations and maintenance of certification and interactions between each other to prove that you know what you're doing in medicine. And but then there is a lot of freedom to sort of use things off-label or, take tacks that aren't conventional. And this is part of the independence as a doctor. So it's a very big question that I'm afraid I don't have an answer to, but thank you for your question. Go ahead.
So just for clarity, can you repeat the full question again?
These are clinicians, and we have tools that are being bought and implemented into hospitals, but they are not really, there was no evaluation of their effectiveness. So what can a regulatory body do to not have the burden of this evaluation on clinics or somewhere else?
Right. So I thought that I understood right. It's a complex question, and I also have to disappoint. There's not a regulation that I can point to when we're looking at this. So when you say, how is that specific AI product regulated here? There's no regulation that I can point to. So it's all existing regulation. I think the major challenge that agencies around the world are facing is that very few technologies have developed so fast.
Well, I think that's an important point because obviously there's regulation missing at the moment, and probably AI tools are another class of tools that we just need some new regulation for that just not existing yet. That's what I think. It can't go on like this. I mean, so.
Payment. Yeah, sorry. Okay, we had spoken earlier during the coffee break about paying for these systems, the insurance companies paying for them, and typically that also leads to some sort of regulatory oversight in terms of approval, but that's also not like a good way to go. It's just sort of by default.
Yeah, so maybe I share some of my thoughts here. So regulatory, they're also very interested in these new technologies and are constantly thinking about how to evaluate them. If you look into the like machine learning conferences, you will see the presence of their research groups there discussing about the different technologies that has been implemented and their perspective of evaluating those technologies. So I feel like regulatory bodies are also looking into this. But on the final question of how that gets into clinical use, what are the evaluations that are relevant? So this actually quite often comes to the like more traditional evaluation. It's really, for example, if you look at the efficacy of the AI tool, in the end, it comes to whether it diagnoses the patients correctly, it stratifies the patients correctly, or on this. So when you look at from the performance perspective, there's not a lot of too much of a difference, although there might be specific aspects. When, for example, it's a black box model, then you may need to do a bit more on the explainability of what you have done in the results. So those are small aspects, but I would think from the majority of the clinical questions still comes to the kind of all the clinical relevant evaluations as for all the other products that will be used in clinics or in the medical space.
Well, again, I think we've hit the end of our time, but I want to thank all of the speakers here for participating today in the panel and in their great presentations, and thank all of you for sticking to the end. We're going to have a 3-minute break, and then the General Assembly will start. Thank Thank you.